I'm Paul Schaefer,
I'm Will Lee.
and you are watching the Letterman Podcast.
Welcome once again to the Letterman Podcast. My name is Mike Chisholm. Okay, this one here is a fun one for me. It's going to be a fun one for everybody, don't get me wrong, but it's a fun one for me because this guest tonight represents worlds colliding for me back in the day as a viewer of Late Show with David Letterman. Some of you know, I don't know if I've talked about it on the show here. Some of you who have gotten to know me outside of the show here know that I'm actually a bit of a toy collector. I love my action figures. I loved them since I was a little kid, and I've got some collectibles, but also like stuff I break out of the box and like hang up in my office and things like that. I've got a lot of, I've always had a love for toys, and the group of people that I used to watch Late Show with David Letterman with, a bunch of guys in our early 20s, we liked action figures. We were kind of action figure nerds. We like G.I. Joes and we like Star Wars and we like all sorts of different action figures. We subscribed to a magazine back in the day called Toy Fair, and the gal who's going to come on here today used to write for Toy Fair. She Shannon Eis is her name, and we became aware of her because in the early 2000s on Late Show with David Letterman, they started doing a segment with Shannon Eis. She would come on and she was a toy expert. And it never really was clear as to where her expertise in the toy industry lay, but she was a toy expert that would come on and talk about either toys for the summer or toys for the holiday season, toys that were in, and Dave would go and play with those toys, and there would be hilarity. The most famous example of that segment is probably Dave driving around in a big cupcake car, driving around the stage, and that was done, closer to the end. I think that was done in 09, 010, something like that. And then Dave took the cupcake car, drove it into the Christmas tree that year. That was during this segment with Shannon. And I'm so delighted that she would take time to come on and talk a little bit about it. This is a time in her life that meant a great deal to her. And it was cool. And through the episode, reveal some stuff that she went through and what the segment meant to her. You'll have to watch the segment or watch the show here to figure that out, what that is. But boy, there's some real heartfelt beauty in this episode here talking about this. We're really, really excited that Shannon is still around doing what she does in the way that she does it now. But yeah, just super grateful to have Shannon on here. We have one sponsor at the Letterman Podcast, that is hello-deli.com. Rupert G may not own the Hello Deli anymore, but he does have hello-deli.com. Go to hello-deli.com for any Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, hats, t-shirts, mugs, all of that beautiful stuff. In the meantime here, I hope that you enjoy this week's offering of the Letterman Podcast featuring our very special guest, former toy expert, Shannon Eis. Okay, Shannon, this is a big deal for me having you on today for a variety of reasons. I'm an action figure nerd. I've been collecting action figures for years and years and years. I told you just off camera beforehand. My friends and I used to buy Toy Fair magazine every month, and we loved following the industry and enjoyed it very, very much. And then suddenly this other thing that we loved, David Letterman, suddenly this gal starts showing up sometimes twice a year, 19 appearances you made, this toy expert. And we're like, oh my gosh, who is this gal and what does she do? How is she in the toy industry and how did she end up on Letterman? And now I get to finally get some of those answers. Shannon, welcome to the Letterman Podcast. And I cannot wait to start asking you for stories between now and your future appearances. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Well, thanks for having me. This is exciting. And it's a great flashback and well worth the conversation. I think it was such a fun ride.
How did you get into the toy industry originally? What was your role and how did you get connected with the crazy circus that is Late Show with David Letterman?
Yeah, I'll try to talk in some sound bites because they can definitely go on. My background is in education and psychology. And within that, I studied an area called pedagogy, which is the different ways that children learn. And we say in the toy industry that play is a child's learn. That's how they learn. That's their job. That's how they create social connections, create physical, small, large motor skill connections at very early ages. And, but I started off teaching and honestly high school teaching, and then kind of got drawn off the path one summer when I didn't have a teaching job very early on, and was asked to like do some PR work. And I was like, what? I remember asking the general manager of this hotel property, what's PR? And but that was like, okay, this could be a fun way to fill the summer. And it ended up becoming communications, becoming something that I really loved. I'm a writer at heart. And so I got kind of off my path of working with youth and working on youth related programming and curriculum. But I was learning something new, and I went into this corporate world that I never expected to be a part of. And then one thing kind of led to another, and I got the option to move to New York.
Yep.
And when I moved to New York with my husband, I had to start looking for a new job. I'm like, well, if I'm going to do public relations or communications, I want to do it in an industry that is focused on children. So I'm going to make that change. So I applied to only jobs in New York that were focused on children's products, children's issues, regulatory things. And I stumbled upon a role for assistant communications director. Very young to have a title like that, but inherited a wonderful boss in Terry Bartlett, who was going to teach me kind of what that meant and how I was going to work within the industry. So the group is called the Toy Industry Association. It was actually called something else previously, but we evolved to that in my first year. And this is the regulatory body that represents the interests of companies that produce playthings, not juvenile product things like cribs and high chairs. That's the Juvenile Products Association. They have very different regulatory oversight body, but the toy industry, which also has its own regulatory bodies in the US that oversee how the products are shipped, how the products are made.
Do they rate the age of the toy appropriateness and things like that as well? Or is
They
that...
produce the guidelines. So they work with these different
Okay.
government agencies to say, this is what is safe, pedagogically speaking, for an infant, for a 1-year-old. And a lot of this is things like small parts, as you can imagine, the length of string, all of those things come into age guidelines, which ultimately develop how toys get made, right? Not just how they're marketed and how they're packaged, all of which have their own safety details, but how they get made. And so, so I started working with the Toy Industry Association, which owns and operates Toy Fair, the actual annual event. That is the gathering, and it used to be the once annual gathering where the buyers across retailers around the world would descend onto the Jacob Javits Center in New York City and take a look at what the next season's toys are. So the Toy Fair is held in February, and it is for purchasers buying toys to fill their stores for the following holiday season. And even that sometimes is too late. Sometimes they start that shopping process the year before. So huge venue, tens of thousands of vendors, really interesting. You have the big guys like Mattel, the video games, you have Lego, and then you have this whole second floor, which are those inventors, which to me is what kept me so passionate about the toy industry. These are the folks who have the ideas. What if a kid could have fun doing X? And so what you also saw happening at Toy Fair is the bigger toy companies shopping for their next great ideas from these smaller guys who have tiny booths. Some of them with just a tabletop or a laptop, trying to get their ideas visibility, trying to get them produced, manufactured, or get them sold. And so I loved that balance of the giants anchoring the industry because there had been a lot of consolidation. I was in the industry. Hasbro had a lot. Mattel had consolidated. Spin Master entered the market when I was there, and then you had these smaller guys really fighting it out. You know, we say on the bottom floor, but that's metaphorical and real. It was the bottom floor of Toy Fair. So most of my job every year was that, and it was a huge communications platform. Lots of morning television show to talk about trends, to talk about safety standards. But then the rest of my job was doing a lot of what can sometimes be unfortunate work, which is the recall work, the child harm work. So if there's a, you know, we dealt with this with several companies, small parts that were magnets that came off toys and children swallowed them. While some of this can be parent supervision, you know, oriented. Some of them can be design product oriented. I spent a lot of time working with those companies and dealing with media to navigate those safety issues, which put me on TV a lot, almost always in crisis mode. Almost always. And so one day, after a particular very challenging segment on 2020 with John Stossel, I got a call, or my boss rather got a call from a producer at Letterman at the Late Show named Eliana Tower. She is still one of my friends. And she said, hey, we saw this woman on air talking about some like, you know, sad toy thing. Can she do anything fun? And if you've ever met Eliana, this is exactly how she talks. We saw her talking about some sad thing. You know, can she do anything fun? And so, and I was like, I don't know, can I do anything fun? I'd never done fun things before. So she was just like television producer, like grab some things off your desk and come down here and let's just see if we can get you to do anything fun. So I literally like grabbed some random toys. My desk was covered in toys, as you might imagine.
Yep.
Got in a cab, went from 23rd Street to 52nd Street and wearing whatever I wore that Tuesday, like
Yep.
whatever. And ended up on stage with the lights and the film, everybody's in there. And they're like, all right, pretend I'm Dave. And they had some interns
So
standing
this
there.
would have been rehearsal time, and we're already at the stage where Dave's not
Yeah,
doing
literally
rehearsal.
just like
So
that.
you're okay. So that
The
it's in
very
this time
next
frame.
day.
Yep.
It was like
Yep.
Tuesday we got the call.
Yep.
Wednesday I went over there at like, I don't know, 1:00. And I remember they'd already done their stage rehearsal for the show taping that
Okay.
night, and they had wedged me in. So like
Gotcha.
the light crew was there, the camera crew was there, and they were just really looking like, can they envision what something like this on stage would look like?
Right.
And from what I understand, the goal was Dave didn't want to be sitting behind his desk anymore. He preferred human interest
Yep.
1,000% to everything else.
Yep.
He just wanted to be up and having interesting, fun, kind of unexpected conversation. That's the style of his comedy, right?
Yep.
And so while he's very planful and very well read, he kind of wants moments where he can be caught off guard. And that is like the magic of working with Dave, to see what happens and fills that space. And so I go over there with like toys and like a shopping bag, and they put them on this table and they have me pretend with this intern as if I'm explaining to them how this toy works.
Yep.
The intern's doing like, intentionally some of these dopey things where he kind of doesn't get the basics of how a toy works. And we just do this thing for like 15 minutes. And then they come over and they take the mic off me and they're like, thanks so much. We'll let you know, if it works. We've never done a toy thing before, but we'll let you know. And then I get a call back saying, we want you on air on Thursday. And I still don't think I processed what that meant. And so Thursday I went over at the time they told me, and they did my makeup and hair. I wore what I wore to work that day. And I did my first holiday segment with Dave in December in 2003. And
Yep.
I remember I feel imposter syndrome, just imposter syndrome. Like, am I supposed to be doing this? Like, I only do crisis. My communications focus is crisis. And it was, I don't get starry-eyed. I've never been that person, part of just being in New York does that to you. But
Yep.
I just remember being like, the last piece of advice that someone gave me in his crew before I went on stage was, don't try to be funny, just be you.
Mm-hmm.
Dave is funny. I'm like, cool, because I don't think I could be funny if I tried right now.
Be the straight person. Yep.
Yeah. And just like,
yep.
you be your expert. He's not going to try to be the expert. He's going to ask you questions, just answer them. I would love to tell you, Mike, that there are hours and hours of auditions and rehearsals. There was not.
No.
It was like, are you available Thursday at 2?
Yeah.
Okay, qualified.
But that's the magic. Like, okay, so to bring it back to the how big of a did you know very much about the show, about Dave at that point? I mean, obviously, he's one of the biggest celebrities in the world. One of the two major late night television programs on one of the two major networks. Obviously, that stuff you knew. But did you know very much about Dave throughout the years, that kind of a thing? Know that old late night had toy segments, but they never really had one like this. Like, were you aware of some of this stuff, or was it all kind of fresh-eyed perspective?
No, I'm a generation that grew up with late night, so I had mad respect for it.
And
I knew Dave was just like, an icon. But I didn't have I think the great thing about this, and Rachel Maldau said this once, she said she doesn't watch news programs before she goes on air because she's afraid that she's going to unconsciously say things about a topic that she's going to report on. And I remember thinking, I have no
context.
No context. I'm like, it is what we make it, but I think the thing that worked is we had really great, like, intellectual chemistry.
Very much so.
And it's funny thing is to note, I didn't have kids at this time. So I'm out here as this kind of expert talking about pedagogy and play and, foreseeable misuse, the way that we think kids are going to use toys based on the way they're designed and the way they usually end up, projectile. Most toys become a projectile. Most toys with Dave became a projectile. But like, I remember thinking like, okay, I felt like my expertise was good before I got on the stage. But now I'm on the stage and I think people think I'm a bigger expert than I am. Like, total imposter syndrome, But
I know it well, my friend. I know it well.
Yeah. But I'm like, I do know how kids play. I have been around this industry and thousands of inventors and thousands of makers and designers, and I know how to talk about play, right? And
Yes.
I know how to make it. How do I make it interesting for a late night audience, which is not my usual audience? My usual audience was morning show audience, very different.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't talking to like parents who needed to know that this was a worthwhile investment. I'm talking to a man who loves to talk to predominantly 20 to 40-year-old males. That's who predominantly watched late night at the time. And I'm trying to think of like, what would make this interesting to them? And that is just all the things that you would inadvertently do with these products, the kids wouldn't obviously do. So, kind of let him lead. I gave the expertise on how it was made and what it was designed to do. And I remember leaving there, going back to work because, normal day.
Yep.
And then the show aired the next day because we used to tape Thursday and Friday shows on Thursday. And then several years later, we moved to taping the Friday show actually on Monday.
On the Monday,
at some points, but there was always one day of double taping, so it didn't air until Friday night, and then on Saturday is when my phone started blowing up, and I was like, okay, people liked that. It was definitely unexpected to be in the seat, and then they called back and said, hey, we think you want to do that again, and then we moved into summer toy segments as well, which was always chaos, but that's kind of how it started.
Shannon, that's the thing. Like, this is the thing. You were 19 times you appeared on this thing. Some of the years where, and it was 03 right to the end, right till the last one, 2014. Yeah. And then there was some summer ones mixed in there as well. Yeah. I mean, you appeared on Late Show with David Letterman more than a lot of A-list movie stars. Like, you had a lot of appearances on this show, and it feels you've already answered a whole bunch of questions as to how you kind of got it. You understood the role. The not being funny thing is very, very interesting to me, because Dave, if you look back into the annuals of late night and even I think early Late Show, there were times where Dave would do segments where he went to the toy fair, and let's see if we can get some found comedy. He was kind of the man on the street type thing. He did like kind of the old like, I think the toy industry with the comedy industry, I think many times is exactly how you started this thing, where it's like, okay, let's do a sketch or a play on toys that have been recalled. And I mean, certainly SNL did it early on. Late night, they did it early on too. Here are some of the toys that are not appropriate for kids, that kind of a thing. They, have people out and all that. But what they added to it when they added you to this, and I love that this was one of the questions I have for you on the card here. The idea that you were kind of added later on in life to the same trajectory that segments like Stupid Human Tricks or Stupid Pet Tricks or like, and for Late Show, it was Kid Scientists, a couple other ones that would, and inventors that, people who would get Dave from behind the desk to interact with normal everyday people, and the ones who tried to be sort of hams were kind of put back. But you just, it was
uncomfortable to watch, wasn't it, when folks were trying too hard and you're just like, let Dave do his thing. And
there's a juxtaposition here too, which is very interesting, is that Dave didn't like to be surprised. Like, things that were spontaneous many times looked spontaneous, but they weren't. But there were a few times in the show in its history where no, the spontaneity is legitimate, and I'm pretty sure yours is one of them.
There were a couple things for safety that we would rehearse, and he would come out and rehearse, like when we did the zip line across the stage.
The cupcake.
Cupcake. I mean, I have to tell you an interesting thing, and probably just weird. I had both my kids while I was there with Dave, and I also had breast cancer while I was on air with Dave. And so the year of the cupcake car, I had had my double mastectomy. I was in treatment. I was wearing hair coverage, and they constantly were like, "Hey, if you're not ready, don't come on. If you're not ready, don't come on." And I'm like, you know what? It'll be good for me. It gives me something to work towards. I was in a lot of physical therapy to use my arms again, the whole thing. And this first segment back after my double mastectomy and all the things was the cupcake car segment. So he came out during rehearsals because that was a huge prototype. Like, that, I can't believe they were selling that thing based on that. It was literally like cardboard on the inside, and it was in the Neiman Marcus catalog. That's how they found it. And I remember I couldn't lift it. I couldn't raise my arms above this. I couldn't hold more than 1 pound in both hands. And it was this huge lid that went up into the air. And I remember in rehearsals, I was like, even with his stand-in, I'm like, we can't wing this. I need to know how this is going to work because
Yep.
it's not going to be funny on air. He's expecting me to lift it up so he can crawl in and I can't lift it.
Yep.
Like we're just
Yep.
going to be both sitting there looking at a stupid cupcake car. And so he, you know, he just participated when, especially in those rehearsal moments when it was really important to get it right. There was a pogo stick moment that we were going to do. We ended up pulling the pogo stick because of how it went in rehearsal.
Yep.
And so like there were moments when he's like, yeah, I don't want to wing this. I don't want to wing this. Let's get it right. And the
Yep.
cupcake bar is a great example because we had a plan. It went thoroughly off plan, which I think is the beauty of that segment.
Very much so.
But it didn't go to plan at all. And but it was great. And I remember for me personally, I obviously had been ill, you know, that year.
Yeah.
And you know, he and his team sent flowers and were checking in on me. And it's like, this man is busy. He's got a lot going on. That was a tough year for the production and the team. And like in the middle of something, I get this like flower and card from him. And it was like, that was lovely. So when it came time to like, hey, do you want to do this segment? I'm like, I feel like this segment is supposed to be that moment where I turn around and get my life back together and start, and, you know, and just prepare for something in the future. Because at that point I hadn't been, you know, and the cupcake will forever live in my mind. It's like, okay, that's the moment I stood upright again, went on air, and Dave put me back together.
Shannon,
You know,
you've absolutely blown me away with this. Cancer is one of those things. You and I have shared. I don't know each other that well, but we have shared. I've told you my granddaughter and how my granddaughter is my everything. We spent 6 months at BC Children's Hospital with her. She's a survivor when she was 18 months old, so I got to ask you this. We're going off course here, but we're going to stay off course because this is important. You rang the bell. Like, we're years later now. I mean, gosh, we're 10, 11 years outside of that moment that we're talking about here.
yeah.
All clear. We're all good. You're still
We're all
in great
good.
shape?
We're all good. You
Oh,
know, you got to stay vigilant. But you
yep.
know, we're all good. 2009, I rang the bell, and you know, just like actually rang it after that segment. I was still in treatment during that segment. So I rang it after that segment. But yeah, been all clear. Thank you for checking and
Oh, I'm
sending
so
much love.
happy to hear that. And I'm glad we get to mention this here right now because there are people out there. My wife and I wrote a book about our experience with our granddaughter. And that was our way of trying to, we want to talk about this stuff. It's an uncomfortable thing, but you can talk about it to help people who are going through this stuff and help support them. And as you know, it can be cancer is one of those times that it can be lonely. There's a lot of downtime with cancer.
Yeah.
People who are in your life, seemingly when things are going great, suddenly sort of
Just-
disappear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then a group of people that you maybe didn't consider would kind of grow up like flowers and you find your
Yeah.
tribe at that point. I'm certain I'm saying some things to you that are common
Yeah.
that happened with our family as well.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that was interesting about that time was like, I remember when I made the decision and I had to work with my physical therapist to like make sure I could physically do the segment because they could be very demanding. I remember like we in our rehearsal, but then also right before we went on air, Dave said, you know, just as we're standing there, do you want me to mention it? And I was like, no, I don't think I do. I wasn't like, no. I just remember thinking it would be really great to feel normal in this moment. So since people saw me last, you know, which was the summer, I've been through this hell train, right? And I remember him just checking on that, honoring that. And then I watched that segment back, and I don't watch other segments, but that segment felt particularly chaotic.
Yeah.
It was like, I need to see what the world experienced when they watched that. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I look normal. I just remember thinking like how cool that was because nothing had felt normal for months, to your point. And to like to be able to get on stage with him and have fun and play and have that like awesome chaos be like a turning point back to a new version of normal. It still stands out, you know, as part of my recovery. And so, you know, that was part of like what that show did for its people. Like they were loving to me as I was one of its people. And it was just special in that way.
God damn, it sure puts in a new perspective for the word play. Like you use that word and you got to go and be normal and have that beautiful thing that is play that so many of us adults desperately in this time and place, polarized cultures and all this sort of stuff that we have. Boy, isn't play important. And you got to experience it in a way that was extremely important that night. Cause it was chaotic, but it was so fun. And I mean, you knew that's what Dave was going to do. Like that's old school Letterman done at the time. You know, the things that he would do. Dave would go do crazy things back in the day. The Alka-Seltzer suit, the cereal bowl, that kind of stuff. There's a car like a cupcake. Of course he's driving it. Of course he's going into the Christmas tree. Of course that's going to happen. But we need to see it play out. And you got to to play there, the
Yeah.
idea that you got to feel normal that night adds a dimension to that particular segment, which is a very famous one. It made the final montage.
Yeah.
You know, and boy, have you added a dimension to that. What a cool moment. And that was before the go-karts, right? Because the go-karts was
Yes. Oh
another
my
driving segment. That was a chaotic one
go-karts
too.
on the street. Oh gosh.
The
It's
go-karts were
you
drifting
unlock.
go-karts, and he drove that into the Christmas tree in the studio
Yes, yes,
too.
yes, yes, yes. And he we also did the zip line in the Christmas tree, which was it was always the goal was take down the Christmas tree, as you know. And so or put Paul's life in danger, which was a regular theme as well. Much to Paul's chagrin. But he was always game. He was always game. And you probably know this, having watched the show, every time I came out, he would play Ice Ice Baby, which
It's on the card.
which is still to this day, my kids' last names are Ice, obviously. So it's still a thing that happens to them now. My son walks out on the basketball court, Ice Ice Baby comes on. So it's pretty funny.
They
it has stuck with us.
and it's moved down to the kids too. That is
Yeah.
precious. Yeah, Paul, we've had many members of the band on here and whatnot, and one of the things we love to celebrate on here is the cleverness of the play on music for people.
And the quick, just still to this day, nobody does it like Paul. Like nobody, his ability to, and he sat in rehearsals, so he had a sense of okay, here's what to expect. And granted, 20% of what we could expect actually happened, but he was a planner. Like he has such a production mindset, Paul, that whole band, that they want people to experience the full moment and not have music be a reaction to the moment. Like music so quickly became a moment, and there were just so many instances of that. Of just, I would be dying on stage laughing at what Paul was doing in real time in response to it. Just such good. Music was his wit. It's a superpower.
That was actually a question that I had here, or a version of what you just said is the rehearsal versus, because it was, you did come in. I thought maybe you had the tail end of Dave doing rehearsals. You did have a chance to have Dave do a couple rehearsals, as you mentioned, with a few things. However, the vast majority of your segments, it was either the Stangles or it was the new version where Dave didn't do rehearsal.
Correct. He watched rehearsal. He watches.
Yes. Oh yeah, watched everything. But
he's a planner.
Absolutely.
But I think once they got more comfortable with me and knowing that I could be planful about how things worked and how we'd move from one thing to the next and how to use the space. Like he had an intern who eventually became one of my producers, Ryan, who is the same height and size as Dave and almost the same weight. So that's part of what we had to plan for, was like the actual physical mass of Dave, and will it work with this thing that we want to show on camera, like the go-karts and other things, pogo stick. And he would watch rehearsal, and you would get feedback, and sometimes you'd have to go back out and do something different based on that. And I think that's fine. Like that is a trust fall, right? Like they're okay with you doing this thing. And most of rehearsal is like, will the electrics on the thing work? It's not about will they work. It's like all the other mechanics of the segment. And so it was like, for me, I most of the time didn't, especially those last 4 years, he didn't have to come to rehearsal, and our rehearsals got down to like 9 minutes. And so
my question was, were they fun and funny, or were they more textbook? And then you had to figure out the X factor of, okay, for the actual show, like we know the mechanics of this thing, and now here comes that X factor, which is Dave and his wit and his reaction, the reactions that either look spontaneous or actually are spontaneous. Is he going to throw you a curveball? Because that's the other thing. So many folks have talked about the curveballs that he would enjoy throwing at people to take the quote unquote straight person
to get
off the game
or
whatever.
Reaction.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if there were a lot of those for you or
not. I'd say 90% or more was spontaneous. Like if he came to rehearsal, it was a mostly tech reason he needed to be there. Like, is this thing going to work? Does he want to understand how it works before he crawls into that thing?
Right.
And it was mostly tech. Rehearsals were not like a time for like laughter and joking. There was no script. There was no like, Shannon, think about how you would do this. It was like, let's play how this thing should run. Okay, let's play how it'll run if something doesn't work on this table. And it was business. It was the business of running the show, getting the lighting right, getting my body right, my mic right. How do I need to be? How does the electricity components need to work? And that part was business. Even when he was part of it, it was definitely like they want the show is a well-oiled machine, and rehearsal is necessary to have the machine run. Like I don't remember laughing at all in rehearsals, and that's not a bad thing. It's a job. And so I remember thinking like the things that are keeping me up about what could go wrong, rehearsal's the time to address them.
Yes.
And sometimes they got fixed in rehearsal and sometimes they didn't, but it was the time of like handle the things that are sort of keeping me up, keeping the producers up, and how do we work through that in a way that Dave can see we've solved those problems when he watches rehearsal. So
That was another question I had, and I mean, the cancer part aside, one of the questions I had for you is, okay, '03, you remember the feelings of nerves and all of that sort of stuff. By the time you get to 14, is that nervousness is still there? The last show, I mean, the sentimentality must have been through the roof for you at that point. I mean, it sounds like you're not just a regular, occurring segment on the show. It sounds like you're part of the family at this point, which is not surprising at all. There's many other folks who are in similar circumstances as you who absolutely felt that way, that you were part of the Late Show family and whatnot. Were you nervous the last couple times? And I would love to talk just a little bit about that last show. Like, I mean, we've talked a lot about Darlene Love and her last appearance on that Christmas episode. Your last segment, doing
yeah.
the holiday toy segment, that must have been an emotional time for you.
It was a little bit unknown because they were still in negotiations with CBS. I mean, I think we all had a sense that that would probably be the last holiday toy segment, but there was this open-ended, like maybe next summer there would be one, but I knew in my heart that holiday was how I wanted to end it, because that's how we started.
Gotcha.
I would say I have this affliction that my boss has since told me about. I don't get nervous. That is not a compliment. I mean, being nervous is your body's response to being in tune and being ready, and being able to see things coming at you from behind. I don't have that. So the good thing is I would walk out on that stage at Ed Sullivan Theater and had no nerves, and could just be still and be what I needed to be to respond and, help Dave land the magic that he lands. So
Yep.
I didn't have nerves in the way that I think most people do. I have had nerves since then about other things, but on TV, I never did. Not when I was doing morning. During my time there, I signed a contract with CBS, and I also did morning television for what was then CBS This Morning, and I just didn't. I didn't have that sense of nerves. What it felt like, especially those last few segments, was like walking on the stage and being greeted by an old friend. And I know Dave has real friends, but like TV friend.
Yeah, best friend on TV. That's
He
absolutely.
knew,
Yep.
he knew my kids' names. He asked about them off camera. He, see him in the hallway. He was always walking around the hallway in a sweatshirt and his carpenter shorts, like, you see him in the hallway back in the offices. And it was like, he cared about you. He cared that he was always he would see me and be like, oh my God, yes, we're doing toys again. Like he knew when he saw me that we were going to have fun. And so that unlocked this sense of playfulness with him. So for me, it was like being greeted by a friend. And sometimes I didn't see him until we were 30 seconds before live.
Yep.
Like literally Mike get on stage, and of course he knows the show. He's watched rehearsal. He knows I'm there, but he would immediately like pick up right where we left off. And you have that 30 seconds before the segment, about 30 seconds after the segment. And like, that could be the bulk of my time with him, most of those segments, and other than what you saw on air. And that's okay. Like, we don't need to hang out on the weekends. Like the chemistry and the connection around love for play and wanting each other to show up well and have a great time on air. It was the natural connection. And just super respectful of my family. And his son is actually about 4 months older than my son and my daughter. So his partner and I were pregnant at the same time. And so I was on air, and I was very pregnant that summer, both times, both my kids. I was on air in the summer segment. I was very pregnant. And so, for me, it was just, he was part of like just my life, and in that way of just my life continued off camera while I was, performing on stage with him. So, but that last one, I think I had the sense of like, this might be my last time doing this. I brought my kids to the show a few times. Sometimes they would go to just come do tech checks with me, not on stage, but in the office. We would deliver products. Our house was filled with these products. I had a whole working space where I was testing things to figure out how they might work on air. So they were always so mad that I had to take all the toys they loved to the studio, but they came several times. Their favorite thing about the show was not actually the show. It was the cookies in the green room. Still to this day, they're like, we miss the cookies from the Late Show green room. But like that, that chance to like be a part of that, they still have like deep, acute memories of that. And so I brought them that last Christmas, and they realized this is mom at work, act right, and I was on with Adam Sandler. I had been on with Adam Sandler several times.
Oh,
And so
wow.
he knew them when he saw them. And so he saw them, we were all in the elevator and, they were having their like kind of annual chat with Adam Sandler. And, for them, that was bigger than life. Like they super love his movies, but like for them, and for me, that last time was about sort of making sure, it felt special for all the people in my life who had supported me to be able to do this, because it's a lot of work and they lose me for weeks at a time as we're getting segments ready. And so that the last one was special for me for some different reasons.
I can totally see it. I've got to be honoring of your time. I know we're getting close to, you've got some family commitments here. But you're willing to come back and let me pick your brain on some stuff. You're
Happy
willing
to.
to,
Yeah.
okay, that's amazing. I am going to ask you one last little question about segment producers. How many segment producers did you have along the way? Like Ryan he was a stupid human tricks, and he would do a lot of the human interest segment producers. Was he basically? He wasn't your first one. Was he
He was
basically
my
there? Like
intern.
he
He
was
was my
okay.
intern. He started as an intern, my second segment. My
Yep.
first producer was Eliana.
Yep.
Ryan was her intern.
Yep.
And then when Eliana left, Brian Tata, who is now
Oh, you had Brian. I was going to ask if you had Brian or not. Yeah.
who's now the executive producer at The View.
Yep.
And with he has a beautiful life with beautiful girls and such an awesome human, so talented and smart. He became he was the sports producer before that. So he and Eliana were like, back to back. She did a lot of the human interest and those things, and then he worked on sports. And so Brian inherited me, and we kind of built the rest of it together. Ryan came on as like our go-to, so we were like the triangle, the three of us.
Yep.
Sheila was in the mix a little bit, but
Sheila
really,
Rogers?
yeah,
Oh, you're
really hands
kidding.
off.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
super hands off, but just always just a huge champion of the segment.
And the best hair in show business,
And such
especially for someone off camera. She's so great.
Awesome soul. She's just an awesome soul, like such great energy in her. And so it was mostly like Brian, Ryan, and I. And so I still say Brian and Ryan to this day, like Brian, Ryan. And so Ryan was in basically a video cabinet that had been converted to his office. It had no windows. It was an old closet, and that's where all the toys lived. And so it was the two of us until the end. So,
Wow,
and then I think the last segment, maybe the last two, but I'm pretty sure it's the last one, Ryan fully produced.
Oh, that's cool. That's good to know. Yeah. I love the evolutionary stories of folks' career in this thing. We had Janice Panino on, who ran HR for Worldwide Pants. Yeah. I asked her to tell me some of the stories that touched her more, like people who grew into whatever. She won't do it because they're all like her kids, like from the interns, and the coordination people all the way up to the people who became producers. But Brian Teta, you look at the ascension that he had from where he started to how he ended up and where he ended up in his career. It's just so cool to see. I love that you're a part of this family and you talk just like you're one of the people who were there the entire time. This is so great to talk to you and to get to know you and to say thank you for everything that you've done for us, the viewing audience. Your segments were amazing, and they really, really were. And again, those 20 somethings that you were talking to, I was one of them, and me and a group of guys who loved Toy Fair magazine. We loved this stuff. We loved, the way that action figures and toys had evolved. The way that they had it was becoming a very different, very big industry. And you kind of attached those two things that we love so much. So thank you for that. When did you get out of the toy industry? What are you doing now? And do you have something public where you want people to connect with you or not? Like, what are you doing these days?
I continued working communications. And so when I ended up having to move to California for my husband's job. And so but I split my time between New York and California. So I still work in communications. I actually work with very expensive toys now. I'm at Peloton, which is a fitness technology company.
How long have you been there?
2 years.
Wow. So you've seen incredible growth at this company. Wow. And change. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm a big believer. I mean, since leaving the East Coast, I've worked in a lot of Silicon Valley and with a lot of CEO founders. And so I was at Yelp working for the CEO founder for several years, then went to Google and spent several years at Google.
Wow.
And then went to Airbnb where Brian was the founder. And so I've been at Peloton where I also started working with the founder and now a different leadership team. But for me, Peloton was a big part of what helped restore me physically. I was a very early adapter and really just started like thinking about like physical health a little bit better and taking care of myself in different ways, which sometimes cancer can force, but I hope that people have that opportunity without cancer. And so for me, it was a love brand. And it was a big part of my wellness journey,
Yeah.
and not just the bike, but all the content and the instructors and the ability to really focus.
Well,
And
the attitude, the energy. You used the word energy earlier. Like, I mean, you
yeah,
think
like
about
I
the
respond
energy
to
that comes in
energy.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I got the call, like, hey, company's got some challenges. Are you the type of person who runs into burning buildings? That was literally my interview. And as you can tell, I am a person who runs into burning buildings. So
Yep.
that's what I do apparently. So I said yes. So I've been there for 2 years. And for me, it's the ability to product storytell and obviously user storytell and those types of things. So I'm excited. That job is based in New York. So I spend my time back and forth between California, New York, because I have one more kid to graduate high school in 1 year. And then, hopefully he's going to play ball on the East Coast, and when we'll be back to New York. So I still split my time between California and New York. I've been doing it for quite some time, and it's exhausting. So
Do you still follow toys at all?
I do quite a bit. So many friends still in the toy industry.
Yeah.
I continue to be impressed by these. Well, I mean, look, there's a huge Disney takeover of play and a
Yep.
Disney takeover of entertainment. And so, but really protecting things that are non-tech. And I sound like such an old person right now,
Yeah.
but we now know so much about what happens if we put real technology in kids' hands too early. That's
Yep.
where my background comes in around pedagogy. They need tactile play. We need to kind of protect it and like even engineer it in more ways now than we ever had before, because once they come off of tactile to fully technology engineered play, they don't go back.
Yeah.
And so it's that age compression coming down, how they're playing coming down, screens, even if they're passive screens around them, not screens in front of their face, are
Mhm.
such a bigger factor now. Children's ability to maintain attention for long periods of time is at shockingly low levels. This is screens. This is because the content switching on screens is instantaneous almost, that they can't long-term hold concentration on a task like checkers.
Mhm.
So it's so even to this day, still play board games with my family. Still try to do those logic and reasoning games. I have this wood puzzle in my dining room that is going to cube. It's destroying my will to live right now, but I will solve it. And so like for me, I care about play in like deep ways. And even if it's just literally at the beach playing in sand, which I
Yep.
still do with my older teenage kids. The other day, I was like, hey, I'm tired of looking at your faces on your devices. Let's go look for banana slugs. We live near a redwood forest here. Banana slugs are everywhere. I don't know if you know what a banana slug is.
Yeah.
On the East Coast, big yellow things. But like they will always put down the phone to go find banana slugs. So it's different types of play, but it's still important at all ages to drive that sort of tactile, hands-on motor skill play, in addition to all the really great tech-powered play that we see.
Sure.
But I feel strongly about that, and still continue to contribute to different sources that are kind of reporting on it. My academic expertise is somewhat expired because so much has changed in this field in 20 years. But as a parent and as an advocate for play, I believe it's huge. And what you didn't see on Letterman is us like plugging in a thing and passively staring at a screen. What you
No.
saw was things that can or maybe should not be being thrown, but all the things, and so it was really about, he had a deep belief, and this was again before he even had kids, but even as he had a young son, he had a deep belief that we need to encourage play. It's how kids learn. So
The only video game thing I think you ever showed was it was the year the PS3 came out with.
yes,
But it's the interactive. It's just like the Wii. Like again, I think Nintendo helped, kind of reinvent the wheel again when they came out with the Wii, and then Sony followed and
yeah,
all of that stuff. Because now we have people interacting and playing in different ways, but there's still a physicality to it, trying to
hmm
combine the two elements of play. But that's the only video game or closest thing to a
yeah,
video game I think you guys ever
yeah.
did. I think everything
We
else was the opposite.
went to CES. To your point, we used to go to
Yeah.
trade shows. We went to CES with a crew a couple of years. We went to Vegas
Yep.
and just filmed some stuff, and then they came back and did a package segment, but we went to CES to do that. And it's just harder to show what that play experience is like if a single person is having it behind a screen in a set of goggles or whatever it was.
Yep.
There's still plenty of craziness at CES and Toy Fair to show. But I remember that particular year, it's like everything was about the television screen. And like
Yes.
that's just not good TV to watch things that people are doing on TV. It's like so But I think play has changed a lot in that way. And so, as the interactive piece gets moving, you saw Lego, for instance, do amazing things with Bionicle. Like, talk
Yep.
about the whole intersection of, you can imagine this thing, you can build it. And then when you scan it in and upload it to our system, we're going to program it, make it move for you. It's like the way that Lego is ahead a lot of that. And this really traditional tactile play
Yep.
was fascinating. And I think Spin Master did a fair amount with that as well. And obviously Hasbro and Mattel with Hot Wheels did some really cool work as well in the space. So, and then you so on and so forth, Barbie, you've seen all the mega
Sure.
brands doing it now. But how toy designers come out of like toy design school and use technology is still, so if you haven't had someone on your program from the FIT toy program, that would be very interesting.
Oh man, I'd love that. That's a
They have
rabbit
a
hole
toy
that I would
design
love to go
program.
down.
It's amazing. The folks that they have in there, it's a small program, but
Yep.
these are the types of folks that we should continue to talk about, because they get the pedagogy training about what play should be like, and then they design for that at different ages. It's super cool.
Well, it's a big industry too. Like, I mean, I think one of the maybe multiple of the of your episodes, they talked about, back then it was a $20 billion industry, not including video games. Like, and I see it like, okay, as a 48-year-old dude who happily funded the HasLab Ghostbusters proton pack, like they're crowdsourcing these huge, massive, alpha consumer type toys, for people my age now. They're crowdsourcing it, and then 2 years later, okay, here you go. Here's your Star Wars Razor Crest that you can build on your own. But to me, that is so much better than getting a new Star Wars video game or whatever, because you're going back. You have to put this thing together. You have to do these things, even if it's a quote unquote model or action figure that you're putting up.
Yeah.
It's using different parts of the brain and going back to this thing about play and the nostalgia and all of these amazing things. The toy industry it's fascinating watching it evolve.
Yeah. And it's got a lot more to do because kids are going to keep changing. So, I'd love to see how they're looking at. I've not been into the toy fair halls for many years. I go to Comic-Con, which I love, but that's a very different experience. It's a very different experience, but the creativity, sort of rolling out of those spaces is phenomenal as well. So,
you have to go. And I want to be very, cognizant of your time. So you'll come back on and we can talk about this. I would love to maybe cherry pick 2 or 3 of the segments, and come back on. Like, there's a couple of lines that you said that I'm just like, because I know that segment producers used to always help with, hey, it might not be a bad idea to say something like this at this point here and not. But for you, some of those lines that came out were really, really clever, but it doesn't feel like they were produced. I would like to kind of go through some of the segments with you at another time. If
I'd
possible.
be interesting to know what those are. They literally never messaged me ever. And it was like if something could go wrong with the product, tell Dave to do X, but it was more about how to get Dave to make the product work. But everything else is just like fly by the seat of my pants.
You are an outstanding communicator.
Yeah.
The fact that you don't have your own podcast, never mind the fact that you don't do a ton of these, is astounding to me, because you are absolutely a communicator of the highest level. Shannon, I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule, your family life, to come on the Letterman podcast here. It will not be the last time. And did you have anything that you want to say to your family at Worldwide Pants?
Oh, well, yeah, it's great. I'd still, even this far gone, 10 years after, it's such an incredible privilege. I am still called out on the street. It happened a couple weeks ago with my daughter, and it's like, you're the Letterman girl. Like, I get that a lot. You're the toy girl from Letterman. It happens on the subway. It happened to me in Europe. Like, it is, I mean, I've changed my hair a little bit, but I'm definitely 10 years older than I was, but like, that is a source of pride for me. And it's like, and it feels like a cult-like following, because, there's an audience for Letterman and everybody else was maybe doing something else. And so it's still such a privilege to be associated with the show. It is a huge source of pride for me. And I love telling the story of how it happened and how they found me, and total obscurity, like the definition of obscurity. And so, no, just thank you for the chance to talk, and look forward to sort of diving into some segments. I'm like a little scared and also excited.
A little scared. Hey, you didn't even get scared to go on Letterman. I'll take that as a compliment. No, it's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, we're good at this, and it'd be great to have you. I'll hit stop now, and we can say our goodbye privately. Okay, so I'll just do a little quick outro. We can say our goodbye privately, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Okay, this is why we do the show. Obviously, this is we love to do deep dives and delve into the corners of what made this the greatest body of broadcast work in history, that of David Letterman and company. Shannon Eis, obviously a huge contributor to that, especially the last half of Dave's tenure in network late night television. We have one sponsor only with the Letterman podcast, and that is the hello-deli.com. Rupert may not own the Hello Deli anymore, but he still owns hello-deli.com, your only source for Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, official Late Show with David Letterman merchandise. Mugs, cups, hats, all the other things that you would like. Go to hello-deli.com and get yourself a piece of Late Show with David Letterman history. This has been another episode of the Letterman Podcast with Mike Chisholm. Coincidentally, I am Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.